My golden brother didn't let me live my whole childhood. Hello, Reddit. I'm using a throwaway account because I need some advice on a complicated situation I'm facing. Please excuse any mistakes. I just want to get this out there. A bit about me. I'm a 43-year-old man, the younger of two siblings. My brother Michael, who is 45, was always the golden child in our family. Growing up, he could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When he got bad grades, they would cheer him up and help him improve, whereas I was always met with disappointment, even if my grades were decent. For example, Michael got a new car and a big party for his high school graduation, while I received $300 and a pat on the back. Michael wasn't a bad brother, but we mostly did our own things. I didn't complain much, but I felt the need to move out and explore the world on my own. I went to university in another city and earned my MBA in 7 years. After graduation, I landed a job back in our hometown. During this time, I had minimal contact with my family except for birthdays and holidays. Michael, not being the brightest academically, barely graduated from high school. He dropped out of college, and my parents helped him set up a small hardware shop. I was happy for him, but focused on my own life. Around this time, I started dating Emily, who was 20 then. We met in college, and we were both from the same city. When we moved back home, we moved in together, found jobs, and focused on building our life. During the holidays in 2008, I introduced Emily to my family. They were surprisingly warm and receptive, making me feel more loved than I had in years. I noticed Michael looking at her a lot during the gathering but thought nothing of it. However, he started visiting my apartment more frequently, from once every 4 months to almost daily. It became intrusive, especially since he came in the evenings when Emily and I were trying to unwind after work. I eventually had to set boundaries, leading to a big fight with my parents. Michael apologized and reduced his visits to once every other month on weekends, which was more manageable. In 2011, I proposed to Emily, and we announced our engagement to the family. My parents were happy, but Michael just shook my hand and left the small party I had organized. He disappeared for a couple of weeks after that. We got married in 2013, and Michael brought a +1 to the wedding, a woman named Laura. They got married 11 months later in 2014. My marriage was going well. We had our first daughter, Olivia, in 2015, and our second, Chloe, in 2017. In 2016, Laura messaged me that Michael was obsessed with Emily, and that was the biggest reason for their separation. I apologized to her and wished her the best. I also talked to Emily and asked her about her interactions with Laura, and she told me that Laura was always a bit cold and distant towards her from the start. I decided to confront my brother in front of my family and asked him why he was destroying his life because of his obsession with my wife. He was blindsided by that question and denied everything. We had a massive argument that basically ended with me telling my brother that he was no longer welcome in my house. Both my parents and Emily talked to me and convinced me that no matter what, he was still family. So for everyone's sake, I decided to be amicable. It seemed like he was genuinely working on himself, and we went on with our lives. Fast forward to 2018, I can still recall that day vividly. It was the 25th of July, and I was running multiple errands. My wife took both our kids to see their grandparents. It was sometime after lunch that I got a call from my father telling me to come to their home, and he had a lot of anger in his tone. As soon as I entered, I noticed a lot of tension in the air. My wife was a crying mess, and my parents were trying to console her. Some of my extended family members were there as well. I asked what happened, only to be accused of being the one who committed the assault. I was shocked and confused. They claimed that at a party a couple of weeks back, I had assaulted a girl and then texted her not to tell anyone about it, or there would be consequences. I had known this girl, Amanda, for some time. We went to high school together, and she was part of a larger friends group that I occasionally hung out with. According to her, after the party, which was at a club, I followed her to her car and assaulted her there. She shared screenshots of the alleged conversation with my wife and told her this entire tale. My father slapped me hard, and my parents told me they never wanted to see my face again. Emily was angry and said that we were done. I tried to convince all of them that I never did that, but it fell on deaf ears. I was basically kicked out of their house and told that neither Emily nor the kids would be returning, and my father would be coming over to take their stuff from my apartment. When my father came, I begged and pleaded. But he basically packed a couple of bags and told me never to contact them again, and that he would personally hand me to the cops if I did. By evening, Michael had shared the screenshots and all the details to our extended family group on WhatsApp, from which I was unanimously kicked out. The next few days, I even had people from my friend group calling me to say they were disgusted with me and never to contact them again. I was a mess during that time. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't even work properly. My boss also heard the rumors going around, but couldn't do much until he saw some police action against me. He advised me to leave the organization on my own to keep my record intact, and said he would ensure that I didn't have to even serve my notice period. I tried to argue my case, but he told me that if the cops came knocking on my door, I would be kicked out anyway. And in such a scenario, the gravity of the case would mean I wouldn't get severance, and my record would be tarnished. I grudgingly agreed to his request and left the organization in the next few days. In mid-August, while I was still wallowing in my misery, I received 2 documents from the court. One was a letter of disownment, and the other was divorce papers. I was quite drunk, but I went to my parents' place anyway, only for my brother to come and beat me up and tell me that I was a disgrace to the family, and that it was good that I was disowned. I had blood coming out of my face by the time he was done with me, and I was barely able to stand. My parents and my wife looked at me from afar, but did nothing. I managed to get myself up after some time, a crying mess, and realized that I had lost everything and everyone I knew. I stayed holed up in my apartment for the duration of the divorce. It went as amicably as it could, as I was jobless. Plus, my now ex-parents stated they would pay for the children, so I didn't have to pay child support or any alimony. By January 2019, I was divorced, but trying to pick up the pieces of what was once my life was hard. During this time, I also felt like confronting Amanda. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it could have made matters worse for me due to the women-centric laws in my country, which meant one phone call, and I would be looking at 5 to 6 years in jail. In February 2019, I got into a major accident and spent a good part of 5 weeks in recovery. The staff told me that they contacted my emergency number, which was still Emily at that point, and she hung up and no one showed up. Once I recovered, I realized that I had spent through a good part of my savings and needed to get back on my feet, if not for anything else, to have a roof over my head. However, I realized that I wouldn't be able to do anything in the place I was at. So I sold all my furniture, paid my remaining dues for the rented accommodation, and decided to start from scratch in a different place. I moved to a city 2 hours away and tried to get a job for some time, but to no avail. I also used to drink myself silly, and thoughts of offing myself were recurring. Waking up after seeing a nightmare and a cold sweat almost became the norm. For 4 months this went by, after which I ran into an old acquaintance, David, from college. He was the quiet kid during that time and didn't really talk to anyone, but seeing him after so many years was odd, as he spotted me out from the crowd and called my name. We greeted each other and talked about our lives for a bit. I told him I was in the city looking for a job. He told me he had just quit and was planning on setting up a management consulting firm of his own. He then invited me for a drink later on, where after a lot of talking about our professional lives, he offered me an opportunity to work with him, as he needed a couple of people who knew their stuff. At this point, I thought I needed to work my ass off to just move on with my life, and I didn't have a better option, so I took him up on it. For the next couple of years, we built the business from the ground up, both putting in 14 to 15-hour workdays. After 2 years, David, who was also 5 years older than me, told me that he wanted to retire in 5 years' time, and at that point, he wanted me to take over. This was in 2021, and it felt like I was getting a second shot at life. However, while my professional life was going well, my personal life was still a mess. I started seeing someone a year after I started work with David, but during the time I was seeing her, the nightmares of the things my parents, my wife, and Michael said and did to me would return. I would wake up and then have issues sleeping, which affected my performance at work. But David, who himself was a bachelor, said I should just take it easy, and things would eventually sort themselves out. but they never did. I would always compare the women I dated to Emily. Eventually, I was thinking about her all the time. This continued until September 2022, when I decided to get a private investigator to see what was going on with them. I got the first report from the PY in November 2022, where he detailed that Michael had been married and had 2 kids. Both my parents were living in the same house as Michael. I also received pictures of their lives. This made me feel odd. I wondered why this man, who was obsessed with Emily, didn't marry her, but married someone else. I decided to do something extremely foolish and track down my ex-wife. After a few weeks of mulling it over, I finally tracked her down at her workplace. I decided to meet her there and said I needed to talk to her. She looked shocked and said that I should leave immediately or she would call the cops. I apologized and handed her my number, saying if she wanted to talk, I would always be there. However, after that meeting, I felt a slight sense of relief, as if I had gotten some sort of closure. She called me in early February 2023, and we agreed to meet up over the weekend. We met at a cafe a bit away from the town where she lived, and for the first time in 4 years, we had a conversation. She said she was sorry for what happened, but her lawyer had advised her to keep her distance from me during the divorce and the disownment so that things could go smoothly. I then asked her if she was happy in her marriage to Michael, and what she said shocked me. She was never married to him. She said that Michael had made multiple advances on her during our marriage, and even tried to kiss her when he was at her apartment once. She said she told him off, and he tried to apologize. I then asked her why she never told me all this. She said she was scared that the relationship I had with my family would get strained if she ever did that. I asked her why she left, then, if I was the one who was actually faithful to her. And what she said next is still running through my head. It was Michael who created a fake conversation between Amanda and me, and he had someone say they saw me at the club and gave that information to Amanda. Amanda was more than happy to go with it and bring this to light to everyone. Michael had a friend who worked at a mobile store, and he was able to clone my number and use it to generate fake texts. After I left, Emily had a relationship with Michael for about a year. However, she realized that he was just using her, and the way he discarded Laura made her feel that the relationship they had was completely wrong. She cut all contact with him after that, and after my parents found out, they were mad at Michael. But since they had already burned their bridge with me, they had nowhere to go. So they lived in shame after that. Michael married someone else and had kids, and as Emily understood, he was trying to live a normal life and move on. Emily tried to do the same and started seeing a couple of people, but she said she could never forget about me. I asked her if she would have me back. She told me it was too late for that. The bridges were burnt, and the only way forward was through it. After we talked a bit more, she said she was sorry again and asked me to move on with my life. She told me I deserved better, someone who wouldn't turn their back on me at the first sign of trouble. So I have been trying to move on. But the last 6 months have been harder than I anticipated. I haven't told anyone in my current life about what happened to me all those years ago. But even now, I find myself thinking about my kids, who are 9 and 7 now, and who I have not seen in all these years. I asked Emily to see them, but she said that was not a good idea and that I should just let them go on with their lives. My company is now thriving, and I am planning on buying David's stake in the company as he plans on retiring next year. So while the personal aspects of my life are still in shambles, at least work is something that keeps me occupied. It's odd how things turned out for everyone involved in this mess. I don't know if I will ever fully recover from this, but maybe one day I will be able to put it behind me. Until then, I guess I will keep putting one foot in front of the other, like I have been doing for the last 5 years.